I'm Mark Sexter.
And I'm Linda Zies Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome to Arcane Mark.
Welcome outside of space and time to an anachronistic episode of Arcane Mark. Today, we're talking about deploying anachronisms as a GM. So first off, anachronisms is like a big word. So what are anachronisms?
You're walking along in your medieval fantasy setting and suddenly there's a cell phone.
Hey, it's a cell phone. I'm chilling in another world. Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's when, like when you're watching that TV show and you're like, that show is set in the 1400s, but then they're using like the style of clothing that wasn't around until the 1900s. Is when you have something that has some kind of a set time period to it, and then something from another time period enters in.
Right. Just like different outfit pieces that you might not even think. Like, maybe it's not something that's, like, a big and, like, a giant piece of someone's wardrobe that you would obviously think, wow, that looks like a 1900s, but, like, I think, like, the brassiere was invented a lot later than people think, so if you have, if you have that in a really early piece,
and when you have things that are sufficiently early, it can be like, well, wait a minute, like, yeah, you just think, oh, this is, like, a basic...
Right.
thing that everyone has, but like they didn't invent that until much later.
Or you do things with glass windows, and you're like, wait a minute.
They didn't have glass windows back then.
Only really rich people might have had this, but we put them into this house.
Like, did you put a book in before the printing press? What did you do with your story?
Exactly. So, when it comes to anachronisms in a tabletop RPG, there's some people who think anachronisms, well, that's a bad thing because you can't have anything that is outside of its time, it is in its wrong time. But that's not actually true in tabletop RPGs. Anachronisms depend on the context, the group, and the intentionality or lack of intentionality, as the case may be.
Are people, when they are viewing the setting, are they expecting it to be historically accurate in a certain way so that they can immerse themselves in a story that is consistent and work within those expectations to transport themselves to a different time period? If they are, that's a setting where it might be disruptive to have anachronisms that change the expectations that people have. But even if they are interested in historical accuracy in some ways, there may be other ways in which they're like, meh, whatever. Like maybe they care about what kind of technology is available, but they don't care about fashion or vice versa. Or maybe, they want to make sure that the weaponry that they're fighting with and the styles they're using are consistent with the period, but they're not as concerned with making sure that the social structures and customs are, or vice versa.
The secret of bad anachronism is that it's very rare for an anachronism to actually just be flat out bad. The vast majority of anachronisms are a type that intentionality is unintentional. Whether it's picked up on by anyone, no. The answer is no. Nobody noticed in your entire game table any of the anachronisms. You didn't do it intentionally, and it was neutral. It neither impacted the fun nor in either direction. Maybe slightly positive, even though people didn't know it as an anachronism because the choices that led to it may have been something that was more fun.
Yeah, like maybe you pick something because it's iconic in some way, and then like it's something that people can latch on to and be like, oh yeah, I know what that is, and yet technically that wasn't invented yet.
The 80-90% of instances of anachronisms are like that. They're not ones you came to this episode for because they happened by accident and nobody noticed, and either nobody cared or it made it better and nobody noticed.
The other one, other than like that can be an issue, other than the one that's like, wait a minute, this feels inconsistent with the stuff that I've built up, is whenever an anachronism doesn't really gel with the world. It's like you've just kind of thrown something in there without fully considering the implications of the impact that it would have. So whether that's like, let's say that you introduce a technology for teleporters to a world, and then like there's nothing that changes because of that. Or
you didn't
like
change the marketplaces, and you kept you had teleport that was easy to access and cheap, and you kept having like caravans being attacked by bandits on months long journeys. There's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, this cheap teleportation that I just gave to any amount of people and or weight would obviously be used for all shipping at this point.
Yeah, so when you introduce something that is higher magic, higher tech, higher power to the setting, and then like everything else kind of stays the same, then it can create the sort of that jarring sense.
But
so
the
it's good
secret
to,
is,
yeah.
the vast majority of time, even that would fall into the category of being neutral, and that's maybe not an anachronism since it's a teleporter magic, but it is a setting inconsistency.
Yeah, well, I said teleport magic there, but maybe you're talking about something like airplanes.
Sure.
Or spaceships or something like that.
Right, exactly.
You know, there's something
it's
that
like,
is...
yeah, we've got spaceships. We can not only go anywhere on this world, but into other worlds.
Or, you know, you've introduced, like, cell phones and, like, rapid communication in that way. And it's like, well, you know, you're not necessarily going to have things that are based off of, oh, it takes 5 months for word to reach the capital about this when you introduce that sort of thing.
Right. I know that Baron DeRopp, who does a lot of videos about geopolitics, was talking about sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
And his basic take is just that, like, unless you have a planet like in Dune where there's a magic spice that's like only there and you have to have that exact spice, if you don't have something that is like that unique and necessary, then there's just so many planets and that are out there in so many places that like some of the weird plot lines that happen in most sci-fi stories don't make any sense because just you can just go to a different planet that has those things. And the thing about all of these are though that again, most of the time people don't notice. So what is the rule of thumb for anachronisms and when you want to avoid them? Let's start with that before we talk about when you want to deploy them on purpose. Yes. Because most of them are neutral, they were employed by accident and you didn't even notice. So you want to avoid anachronisms basically if and only if there is someone in your group who might be you who really nerds out about this kind of thing and gets upset if it doesn't match. Yes. Like Linda hinted at when she's like, if you have a weapons buff in your group who knows all the weapons and exactly when they came into existence and why they existed and what they were obsoleted by, and you bring in weapons that should obsolete other ones,
and your weapons like, buff friend be why like, are you using these? It's like why are you using crossbows? You have guns now or whatever.
Right, and so it's basically based on who is in your group and who is going to be like kind of jarred by it. If nobody is, then basically almost any anachronism or inconsistency is okay. Even that teleportation where you have a merchant caravan. If no one in your group is going to notice that makes no sense whatsoever for there to be cheap and easy teleportation that costs 10 gold, which we know because that's how much the PCs have to pay to teleport themselves in their wagon, but then the pieces are hired for 250 gold to guard a wagon because of the fact that there are bandits that are attacking along the way, and
there's no further limitations on teleportation.
It takes 3 months.
Yes.
Maybe your group doesn't care and won't notice that. I would. Yeah. So that would be something that Linda, if she was running and I was in the group, she would avoid doing that. Correct. But you have to know your players.
And I would also avoid that too because it's my style is more that I want things to be... I care about things being consistent in the story because for me, players being able to kind of get a sense of the logic of the world helps them to come up with more creative and bizarre solutions that will all fit together. Whereas I find that like and when I'm playing too, like if there's an inconsistency in the world, I don't really know what to latch onto. So it's hard to come up with ideas.
So if you're wondering, like, I can't ask my players about every anachronism, besides which they might not know. The right way to go about it is during a session 0, just early on, you just be like, okay, tell me something. Is there something you're an expert in, or even if you're not, that you fixate on and that will just stick in your craw if it's wrong or it doesn't make sense? You can give some examples, like weapon types or social and political systems, clothing, architecture, economics, just anything like that. Obviously, they're all simplified in a tabletop RPG.
Absolutely.
But that if it's not just that it's simplified, but that it just flat out is doing something that is just way an anachronism or very jarring or something like that to someone who's deeply into it.
Mm-hmm.
and ask your players to tell you. They might miss something and then later be like, oh yeah. But even at that point, once you've incorporated whatever is causing them issues, you can be like, well, we talked about this in advance. I can try to adjust it, but let's work together on it, because at this point, it wasn't one of the things that you listed at the beginning, and I've already incorporated it into the ongoing campaign in such a way that it affects it, or maybe you didn't, and you can just be like, yeah, we'll just remove it, no problem.
Yeah, maybe you dropped sci-fi style laser weaponry from an ancient civilization, and then someone's like, oh wait a minute, I don't like science fiction type stuff in my fantasy. I want to keep it more fantasy, and then you're like, magic lasers from the ancient civilization or whatever, if it doesn't make any difference one way or another. But if it does make a difference, then yeah.
Then you can talk about it, be like, well, I asked about weaponry specifically, and you said there was no problem. They'd be like, well, I didn't know it was sci-fi. I thought you were talking about, a pistol.
Yeah.
Or a modern machine gun versus swords, and I don't know enough difference between different kinds of guns and weapons. But now that it's a laser weapon, I care, and so you can always have those communication breakdowns. But it's good to talk it out, and you should be able to.
But the vast majority of the time, I mean, you look at things like Galarian as a setting, is a kitchen sink setting that pulls together things from a vast number of time periods. And so that creates situations where it's like, well, wait a minute, now we have our more medievalish thing, and then we have our French Revolution right next door, and then up over there we have our alien technology, and and then you go down south a little bit, and here there be ancient Egypt.
Yep, absolutely.
So I find that though, when you have those kinds of that kind of cultural coexistence, to me, is easier to handle than the technological coexistence, because if you have something that logically should have spread everywhere and really revolutionized things, then it's well, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
How did this not happen?
How did this not spread? It's always a little weird when it's just very enclavey and somehow doesn't leak. You think back to when just a few guns made it to Japan, and then Smiths reverse engineered them, and before long they were everywhere. Technology tends to spread pretty quickly once it gets somewhere, especially if it has a use in things like war.
Yes. So then you look at things like in Galera, and you have the fact that the gun technology from Alkenstar and Dunkenhold and things like that is spreading, whereas the much higher tech Numerian technology, it's the people just don't even remotely have the knowledge or the tools that they need to replicate that sort of stuff. So they're just I don't know.
We can never fix this.
We can't fix this because it's just so far beyond. Yes.
That's right. So those are the times that you want to press pause on anachronism. It's basically, is there someone in your group who's bothered by it?
Yeah.
Now let's talk about deploying anachronisms on purpose.
So one of the things that I was talking about sort of as a thing to watch out for on the flip side is very powerful, is the idea of a what if, where you take something that is familiar in some ways and then you throw something in that is from a different time period to ask what would happen if this thing was invented a long time ago? What would happen if we bring together these two themes and ideas?
That's right. So you could be what if ninjas versus Caribbean pirates?
Mm-hmm.
That didn't really happen, but it could.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's even some things that seem like anachronisms that actually were around at the same time period. You could have samurai engaging in Mexico with Western type themes.
Yeah.
And it would be well, there actually were those kind of stories being told in the world
at the same time,
yeah. Just in different parts of the world. So, but there's some that just are from just very different time periods, where you have the medieval knight versus the Caribbean pirate versus the ninja in a three-way free-for-all, and dinosaurs.
Yes, exactly.
The dinosaur riding prehistoric cave people who also shouldn't have dinosaurs even to begin with.
Yes, exactly.
Get thrown into the mix, and it's who wins.
I mean, dinosaurs are a perfect example of an anachronism that people are yeah, that's cool. Dinosaurs are cool. We want to do stuff with dinosaurs.
Exactly.
And no one's going to be well, technically, there weren't dinosaurs coexisting with.
So the power of anachronisms is to give us a what if on purpose that brings something that should have had no way to coexist.
So that can either be something that was something like dinosaurs that would have been long gone, that you're like, what if that was still around, or something, that's in the future of your setting.
Right, even if it's not in the future for us.
Yes.
What it might be. But it's just something that shouldn't exist yet in time, but it does. Whether it comes from another dimension, another planet, literal time travel, or anything else.
And then it's an interesting question of how do you deploy it? Is it something that you're saying, well, in this world, this thing has been around for a long time, this technology, this movement, this idea, and people just accept it as typical, and then society changes in a particular way based on it? Or is it something that's suddenly introduced and then the PCs are part of experiencing it? Are they the ones who are introducing it? Are they the ones who are dealing with the ramifications and the fallout of something that can shake society in such a profound way?
Exactly. So, essentially, when it comes to deploying anachronisms on purpose, you want to think about, basically, the splash factor. Is it cool?
Mm-hmm.
Make sure it's not something that sticks in the craw of someone first. Make sure it's not one of the types you literally don't want to deploy. You want a cool splash factor. You can also think about whether it asks an interesting question that make people think about the way, it's almost in the same way that like alternate histories of Earth can.
Another direction to go about for thinking about anachronisms is thinking about how the ways that the world you're setting things is different from the real world would cause things to develop at a different pace. Well, one of the biggest examples there is magic. There are certain things that you're like, well, a setting with medieval technology couldn't necessarily have X, but they couldn't have steam engines, but you could have that are steam trains running around, but you could have like, oh, we power this with magic from the plane of air. This is a train that's doing these sorts of things. So you can simulate things in different ways, and magic allows for a coexistence of things much differently, because there are certain things that are like, well, this people stopped with this particular technology because it's not very efficient, but like if you have magic for like sending things around instantaneously, you wouldn't necessarily need to develop certain technologies. Or if you have magic that lets you replicate things, then you may not necessarily need to develop some of the modern production or repair things.
Or communication magic versus communication technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever magic is good at, there's much less pressure to invent something that does exactly the same thing, because you are still putting all the same money into research and development, but you don't necessarily have a great upside of being like the first in the market who can do the thing, because there's already mages who can do that. So at best you can try to price compete them.
Yeah.
But it would be way better if you did something nobody else could do, because then you can set the price for that new market.
And then if you have a part of the setting or like an event or something that causes the magic to drop out, and then suddenly you're like, well, never invented a printing press because we write it down once and then we use mass copying magic. We don't need to have this kind of bulky technology. And then, it's like, oh, wait, well, that doesn't exist.
Right. And there's some instances where even modern technology can't keep up with magic. For instance, teleportation is better than any form of high-speed transit.
Mm-hmm.
Or opening up a magic portal and just hopping through, which is essentially equivalent.
Yeah, and like the kinds of technology the kinds of things you have with magic where it's just like, yes, I have this magical thing that lets me store things in here in an extra dimensional space for infinite storage, or I can fly, or I can move at ridiculous speed, or all that kind of stuff that you can do with magic.
Any of those could be like approximated with technology, but at least anything approaching our level of technology is not going to get you to a literal instant transportation.
Yes.
So,
on this episode, teleportation is not available.
Not available in stores. Act now and pre-order your Arcade Mark brand teleporter for the year 3024.
You heard it first here, folks.
Yep, that's right. So, basically, when you're looking at anachronisms, the way I want to classify it is, vast majority are in the middle. You did them by accident. Nobody cares. Bad anachronisms are not universal. There's no objectively bad anachronism. It's just whatever's bad for your group, because you have a player or you or more than one player who are all like, no, that just jars for us. It feels off. Let's not do it. And then good anachronisms are ones that you and your group think are cool, either because they're exciting or they ask an interesting and what if question, or just any other reason that you like them. So, just like with many other things, you need to check with your group, because maybe you have a bunch of people who are just like, everything sticks in our comp arc.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like, what do you guys... They're like, it has to all be accurate to everything. It's like, okay, so tell me what things you're an expert in, because I'll just pretend it's accurate in the other ones. And they're like, everything. We include one person in our group who is who literally does metallurgy and makes medieval style weapons and knows as much as any modern person about their usage and origin.
And then we have a scholar of architectural history who is really going to care about everything on every building.
And also is really into fashion from across the ages and knows when every single piece of clothing was ever invented.
And then we have a PhD in economics who's going to scrutinize
your entire economy, your setting, and determine where things don't make sense, and possibly exploit the economy to.
Should we maybe talk about a slightly more realistic version of this, where you have players who are like very specialized in something, and you're like, but I want to play around in that space?
Okay, so what do you do if your players are specialized in it, and they say that an anachronism or inconsistency is an issue for them, and you wanted to do it anyway?
Well, first of all, you can talk to them and get some knowledge from them about like what's their expertise in that area. And figure out.
What if they tell you, but they're like, just no, the thing that you want to do doesn't work? You can find a different group and tell that story with that group. For example.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying stop playing with your current group. They're probably great, and just maybe not for this one story where you tell this weirdly out of joint anachronistic economics story to a group of like Nobel Prize winning economists who do not like the economic story.
Well, I mean, like, if someone in your group is, like, literally going to be annoyed by the plot point, like, well, first of all, I would say, like, that people tend to be less annoyed by something if there's, like, a reason in the story why that came about. So you could be like, oh, you know, the reason why this happened is magic, or, like, contact with this other group that came in. I see.
Yes, Kojo and chat said, get rid of your friends. Arcade Mark 2024. No, you don't have to, and maybe you can find a compromise. Maybe you're like, okay, Nobel Prize winning economist friends, I want to do this economic anachronism. You guys say it will ruin the game, but let's reach a Nash equilibrium together. There's got to be some kind of zero-sum settling point where we can all
you can avoid doing anachronism in that particular section and then find some other type of thing to introduce, or some other means to change things that isn't directly that, if it's a specific pet peeve of a player. But like usually, like realistically, I've found people much more likely to be like, you know, if there's some way that it makes sense in the story, then they're set. Or you just talk about it and you're like, yeah, we're not necessarily going to be realistic here.
And then your Nobel Prize winning economist friend is like, well, actually, a Nash equilibrium would not apply here in this particular case where we're working together to create a tabletop RPG, because there's not necessarily an expectation of an adversarial zero-sum game, since there are some things that we can create that everyone would like and that would raise the benefit for all. You were just here deciding that you want to do these economic things, which are not a necessary predicate. And then you're like, okay, this is why we have a problem.
I know, but like more realistically, it would be like doing stuff where you know we have physics PhDs in our home group, and it was like, all right, you know what how accurate do we want to be? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. So we're like,
not only do they not care, like, look, we had 3 physics PhDs in our group, and somebody asked me a question when I was at Paizo, like early on, about like the fluid dynamics of the whirlwind ability of an air elemental, because not everything is specified, and they wanted to know based on volume of it turning into a whirlwind. So I asked our 3 physics PhDs, and you know what they told me? Mark, they said, We're physics PhDs in quantum mechanics, not fluid dynamics. We don't know how to answer a question like this.
It's like the most.
Why would you think so?
Yes.
That is
the most
like
PhD
the
answer.
most PhD answer in the universe. So similarly, when we told them we were gonna like go smash and beat up a meteor shower so that we could stop it from causing astrological disaster on our kingdom, they're like, yeah, that sounds like fun.
But I think that one thing that experts can sometimes be challenged by is that they know so much about how things are supposed to work that they're not really sure how to engage with the thing that's not working the way they expect. Whereas the people who don't have that foundation will just kind of go with the flow. So giving them some more information about like how this anachronism works and what those baseline expectations that they can build off of can be really helpful, so they're not just stuck there being like, well, this is how this would do.
Yeah, it's exactly the same reason why some people say it's easier for newbies to learn some tabletop RPGs than someone who's experienced in a different tabletop RPG and comes in with the wrong assumptions.
Yeah.
Similarly, your expert, it might not just be that it sticks in their craw because they're like, I just keep noticing this error every time it comes up, but it also could just lead them to make faulty assumptions.
Or lead them to be like stuck in thought and like distracted by it because they're like, wait, is this, how do, what, if they're used to using their knowledge to understand that type of thing in the setting, and now what are the fundamental assumptions?
It's like, now I don't know what to think anymore because I was using my real world common sense / not very common sense because it's the sense of a super ridiculous
and Kojo's also mentioning one of the things that we started to touch on before and didn't get to as much, like including those group experts in building things out, because maybe they're maybe it's not exactly the way that things are, but they can also help you figure out like the what ifs and what would naturally happen because they understand the different factors behind things.
Mm-hmm.
And come up with something that is richer and cooler than you could come up with on your own as a non-expert.
Yes, that's why asking them what they're an expert in at the beginning is so helpful, not only to figure out what sticks in their craw, but also what they can help you with.
And, realistically, you'll find out more about what people are experts in as you go along and you're playing with them and you notice what they're paying attention to and what they're talking about more.
That's right.
Whether it's something that they have their character know and then they are role-playing someone who's very knowledgeable, or maybe their character's not so knowledgeable and they're having a bit of a laugh at their character not understanding something that is their area of expertise.
There are certain things that like the person themselves might not realize going into it. Like I had one player in one of my games who was really, really good at applying like the assumptions of like the weird magical world and setting to extrapolate things that should work in the magic system that were things that I was trying to hint at, like as existing or being something that would happen next. Whereas other players, being more used to the real world, did not. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that if I'd asked ahead of time that player would have said that. But he was just extremely, extremely good at doing that. And so that was something that we just kind of discovered during play.
Mm-hmm. I see Rico.
Rico has a friend who's in engineering who does include fluid dynamics, and said it is in his wheelhouse to answer the air elemental question, but the answer is this game has dragons.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but the dragons use magic to do all of their stuff, according to at least two well-known book, Battle Zoo Ancestry's Dragons.
Well, are you gonna say that air elementals don't have a magical component?
They do, but if they don't have, the question is how big is the spouts of the whirlwind? Assuming, because there was no answer in PF1, it just told you like what size creature it could hold.
I see. Yeah.
But like, what size is it, assuming that there's some kind of conservation of volume? Right,
okay. So that's something that's getting back into some more fundamental physical forces.
So if you were just like, yes, I know there's dragons, but they just wanted to know how big it would be based on that kind of a logic.
Yeah, because I mean, that real world logic is useful for answering questions when you're like, I don't know. Well, how would that work in real life? Let's look something up.
There we go. Send HHS says, what is the fluid dynamics of a dragon while flying through air versus swimming through water? Well, I don't know. Maybe you'll...
Does magic cause Is the additional magic needed to stay afloat? I would think that would be more difficult staying afloat in air versus like the additional power needed to propel yourself through water. So,
That's
what
a
does
good
that
question.
mean for the way that you impact the currents?
Are any of our three physics PhDs like still in Taiwan right now? Maybe Sen could ask them in person, and they will also say, "We're quantum mechanics PhDs. Why did Mark send someone to go see me in person?" Yeah. I do not know the answer to this question because I am not a physics PhD of any kind.
That's true. Is magic why a 3-foot wire tripwire traps cost more than a half-mile wire chainmail shirt?
I think that the answer is that tripwire traps cost more because you need to have a do-it-yourself kit that you're carrying around that can be assembled in a very short period of time. Whereas the chainmail shirt was created in advance. I think that's gotta be why.
Yeah, I like Kojo's answer too, economies of scale.
Oh yeah, economies of scale, that's true. You know, they're just making all the chains and all the chainmail shirts, but how many do-it-yourself tripwire trap kits do you actually need?
Oh, there's an answer. A ton of extra chainmail shirts lying around Absalom from all the film
No, that's
pieces.
a legitimate economic projection. Like,
if you have things that don't expire or go bad, the vast amount of Golarian history means that, like, how many
Golarian's history lasts way too long compared to most histories. There's all sorts of stuff. And, like, the Colossus of Rhodes probably wouldn't have realistically been built either if they didn't have those leftover siege engine materials, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's real world historical backdrop to the suggestion that failed sieges or just other things that you found due to the vagaries of history can lead to all sorts of changes in the economy.
Absolutely.
Kojo says, at the Chainmail Emporium, every set of chainmail must go! So yeah, basically...
Oh, and there's another point is chainmail shirts don't get destroyed after one use.
And yeah, the tripwire does. And so you can pass down that chainmail shirt until it gets ripped apart by just wear and tear out in the field. And even then, you probably pay a blacksmith to repair it because it's cheaper than getting a new one. Whereas that tripwire trap, you're going to need a new one
Also, I figure the
time.
trap needs to be very carefully designed in such a way that you're not going to set it off on yourself when you're...
Yes.
When you're setting it?
It has to be designed so it's very, very unobtrusive and hard to detect. And, again, it has all the pieces you need to set it up anywhere. Like, not even just a place with 2 pillars, but, like, almost anywhere that you were going to need a tripwire. So, like, if you think about it, being able to set a tripwire trap that's just, like, randomly in a flat, open plane is pretty impressive in its own right.
Oh, there's a comment too. When your armor's worn out, turn it into dice bags to make it useful.
There you go.
Durability variant system.
Maybe there should be a dice bags item in a section that was. I think that Dustin Kitsune Warlock, who's in the chat, wrote a section of, I want to say, Grand Bazaar or one of those books that could have included a dice bag or something like that in it because it had a lot of mundane gear.
Yeah.
So, it didn't have a dice bag. I think it may have had dice and game playing kits, but not a chainmail dice bag. That's a good way to think outside the box.
That's gonna be like the mithril waffle iron, right? The thing that you're like, how much do you need it? But then like everyone remembers it from the book if they remember any item.
Look, I had to add back in the ridiculously out of control version of the waffle iron for copy fit and because it was hilarious with the Milani thing in it when I was doing my pass, and it was also during layout because that was a very rushed time, and so it had to happen after it was already laid out. It was like, there's space, here's what we're gonna get.
The mithril waffle irons.
And IS Dustin wrote the buoyancy bag, another underappreciated physics-driven game breaker. Buoyancy is very scary. Having had to write buoyancy in aquatic adventures is far too complicated, even though I vastly simplified it by a lot to just be like, you're assumed to try to get to neutral buoyancy because it would be really bad not to be at neutral buoyancy.
Yes.
And then you can just figure out if you do something that drastically changes your buoyancy after that point.
Yes.
Even then, it's pretty complicated.
Mm-hmm. So, do we have anything else on the topic of anachronisms?
Okay, so we wound up kind of generalizing anachronisms to like anything that's kind of off.
Yeah, we did.
Both space and time, but that's okay because we're off in space and time. Woo! Look where we are. This is where we said we were gonna be.
We wouldn't have wanted to have an episode that's like, what about things that are off in space alone?
That's right. So, we have space and time. I think that's good.
Yeah.
So, thanks everyone, and we will say goodbye to YouTube and then do our other outro. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.
Bye.